Yes.
Thank you, Anna. Thanks a lot for all the interventions that detailed the dramatic photograph of the different crises and also of the narratives, as Palas just explained. I just linked the proposal so you have it, and I also hope that after this event the numbers also will increase, because you can of course support it. A big thank also to Anna, of course, for all her efforts in this initiative and to all the sections that participated in and contributed to it. I will try to present the federalist positions, which basically are the response to all the contexts that we have described and to the different images that we have presented. And just before getting into the proposal, I want to underline some pillars. Some of them were already recalled, so I will try to be as quick as possible. But the first thing is to be sure that when we talk to events, when we participate to debates, we always are able to acknowledge and to explain to others that this phenomenon is global and is structural of the history of humanity, which is just accelerated and intensified by globalization, but it existed beforehand and it will keep existing. And we also need to be sure that we explain clearly that we need to do an effort to be free from what Beck called the methodological nationalism, meaning an interpretation of the world through the lenses of national categories. For example, if we think about identity, this is exactly what the extreme far right or nationalist parties try to do, to tell us that our identity can be recognized just in the place where we are born, and also summing up the two elements that constitute the nation and the state. So basically saying that the state and the nation are the same thing, but this is not true. And this is why a European federation is so important and would be so important to be created, because for the first time we would distinguish these elements. And this is why also the motto of the European Union is so important: united in diversity, because the nation is one thing, but the state is another. One is a cultural process, the other is an institution. And once we have acknowledged that, we also need to recognize and we need to explain to the people that we meet the needs of transnational institutions that are able to provide answers to such phenomenon, but most importantly to the people, and not only to other people, but to us as people, as citizens of the world, as citizens of a globalized world. And also in parallel, recognize the limits of the current setup of the European Union. This is essential to start any conversation about migration. There are so many cases I could name: the veto in and of the European Council, the absence of a rescue operation system and a genuine European foreign policy, the lack of institutionalized solidarity among member states, and again, the limited tools to contrast the violations perpetrated by some of the governments, and again, the lack of transparency and accountability of the European agency Frontex. And again, those are just some of the examples. So for so many years now, some nationalist parties have tried to legitimize the existence of known people, known belonging to any state, so known citizens, and therefore deprived of any basic and fundamental rights. And let's think about it, because the same happened during the 30s, during the 20th century. With the Holocaust, with Nazism, with fascism and totalitarianism. It happened when the majority of people did not care anymore. So on one side, the banality of evil, as Arendt said, and its normalization, and the indifference on the other. And we do not have to think that we are so far from that kind of degenerations and that kind of crisis, because it is a crisis of our civilization. It is a crisis of us as society and who we want to be tomorrow as society. So it is time to dismantle what is becoming a fortress Europe every day, to provide a real alternative to nationalism and being able to govern globalization. So giving hope again to the citizens, everyone. And again, it is not just about creating a system that works better. It's not just about, making things more efficient, but to create institutions that are able to realize our founding values: peace, freedom, solidarity, democracy, and a system of rule of law as such. And this is why I think all of us spend so many hours in fighting for the creation of a European federation, because we want to change the world and its rules, governing the global phenomenon and finding hope again in the future on the base of common values. So this is the premise, and the proposal that we published in the website is made of three main dimensions. One dimension is the current limits of the European Union. The second dimension is the first dimension is the limits, of course, but also the internal policy. So what we need to do inside our borders, let's say. The second dimension is the dimension of the border management, but also how do we make sure that people are not dying in the Mediterranean, are not dying in the Balkans, are not dying in Calais. And then the dimension, let's say, so-called external dimension, in the sense that we need to create a foreign policy and we need to create a common understanding on how we can govern the phenomenon on a global level, not just as Europe towards us as others, but as a world that will be and should be more integrated in the future. So you will see that the first paragraph is really about that. It's about the political stability, conflicts, because migration do not come from anywhere. It comes from real problems, and the problems are becoming more complex. And we know that also climate change is playing a very huge role, because there is a disparity, and people are moving to one place to another because they were born in a place that could not guarantee them a future. And this is a problem, because in this history of pain, we do all have a responsibility, and as Europeans especially, but not only, because today we know that there is also the so-called neo-colonialism also by China and other actors that are exploiting the situation, particularly in Africa, but we could talk about so many other scenarios. So this is the premise, and we all have to take our responsibility also to create a new future. But our policy is disjoint, the European Union policy, and there is no solidarity between member states. So basically, instead of deepening the European integration and creating a real European response to migration, member states, and then the EU, because the EU is made also of member states with its limited or questionable tools, have chosen externalization, securitization, technical answers, and criminalization. You talked about that, so I will not come back to these concepts, but it's good to keep them in mind altogether. So about the core of the dimension of the internal policy, of course, our proposal is to develop a single immigration policy, which is overseen by the European Parliament, which can ensure democratic oversight. This policy should help the member states to manage migration together and ensure a proportional share in the responsibility, of course, respecting human rights. And this implies the reform of the Dublin regulation. And we know that this is an open bound, and it is not acceptable, because a reform of the Dublin regulation was voted by a large majority by the European Parliament already in 2017, and the European Council refused to discuss the proposal. Even the compromise proposal that were elaborated after the reform proposed by the European Parliament. This means that not only it's not just about the fact that the European Council uses unanimity for migration, which is also against the treaties, but it is about the fact that they never discussed this. So it's really, we can see the difference of two very different European institutions. So on one side, a democratic one, who reached a deal after a long discussion between the different parties, and on the other, the intergovernmental system of the European Council. And we know that the sum of the singular interest that does not produce the common good of everyone. And this is the result. So this is about the single immigration policy and the Dublin regulation, but we also need a joint rescue operation, as well as safe and legal channels for those seeking asylum in Europe. Because it is not acceptable anymore that the Mediterranean is the deadliest border in the world, that we witness the case of Lipa, Calais. Few days ago, the mother who died at the border between Poland and Belarus because she was in hypothermia because she gave her socks to her children. And this story is one of the thousands of stories that we know, we are all aware of them. This is not possible anymore. It's years that we repeat the same thing, but we need to keep repeating it. And finally, let's say the external, I'm arriving then to the conclusion in the next three minutes. The the dimension of foreign policy, because we also need to take responsibility on the root causes of migration. We also need to overcome our limitations in foreign policy, because we want to build a world, not only a European Federation that is functional for itself, but a European Federation that can be also a model for the world, for common integration, for common good. So particularly cooperation, because cooperation now was used as a means of externalization. So basically to stop migration in some cases. Cooperation needs to be used for the common good, for the common protection of fundamental values. And also to make sure that the European Union can play a role in the most critical scenarios of the world. And we know this is true about wars, but this is true also about climate change, for example. And of course, it could mean more cooperation with the Southern Mediterranean region, rights-based development policies, ambitious approach to climate change, and so on and so forth. So those are the three dimensions. But these three dimensions go together with another proposal of Jeff, which is the proposal for the creation of a European Federation. We cannot ask for some of the aspects. We always need to take into consideration these three dimensions, but also the constitutional project of a federation, which would guarantee that these values we're talking about could be institutionalized and could be really the base of our common living together in our common political community. So again, it's not about the color of the policy, let's say the party color of the policy, but the founding values and principle of our union that we have already in the Charter of Fundamental Values, but that are not constitutional values. We lack a constitution, we are not a federation, and we are failing. Just a couple of thoughts before concluding. The first is that federalism is intersectional with the fight of feminism, sustainability, social justice, peace, and therefore it is a platform for us to make sure that all the different struggles are together on the same platform to create a genuine democracy on the transnational level and a real future for the citizens of the world. But it is not true that it will end well. And for this reason, we need to act, and we need to feel the urgency every day of the contradictions that we testimony and we witness in Europe and in the world. And we do not have to take this for granted. And this is why we need to fight for forms of constitutionalization at the global level, so Europe and in the world. Because gender equality, economic justice, sustainability, a society of care, a united European solidarity are all part of the same picture, and federalism is able to put all these struggles in the same platform. And finally, there are a couple of things I would like to say about, there is a book, a classic book of sociology, which is called The Double Absence by Sayyad. It's a classic of the studies of migration. And he said that the migrant experience a double absence because he does not belong, she does not belong to the places she left, but also does not belong to the society that she is joining through the migration path. But exactly as the migrant, we are all stuck in the middle of past and future. And we need to find a new dimension of collective existence with our multiple and intersectional identities. And also we need to be careful because there is a Gramscian warning, which is very relevant, which is the old world is dying and the new world struggles to be born. And now is the time of monsters. This is the limbo we are living. And in this limbo, this is the contradictions that we are creating. And the transformation in such time of crisis could lead us to a new conception of community, society, and institutions. So that's why I think that the double absence of Sayyad can be applied to all citizens of the world, because we are all migrants, not only from one place to another, but from one era of our society to the next, which is still undefined. And really towards, and then I conclude, Anna, I know that my 10 minutes are already over. What do we do as federalists? We're on the streets with democracy under pressure. We are working on the Conference on the Future of Europe. We are intersecting what is happening in the Conference on the Future of Europe and trying to bring it at the borders, bring it at the places where the crisis happen. But also we are trying to bring all these issues and all this vision, our mission, our project for democracy in the conference. We need to keep fighting for a European constitution to build on the basis of a real federation. And we can do it in many different ways. I just named the CAP, Democracy Under Pressure, and the work we're doing on the conference. We need to keep doing that. And finally, I would like also to thank once more the President, David Sassoli, for the role he played in the past years, a person who took side, as it was said today at the funeral, but this side was the side for the common good. So it was the side of everyone. It was not the side of someone. So we are all partisan in this sense. And he was committed to not to leave anyone behind, to keep fighting for the project of the Manifesto 2010. And he quoted so many times. Like you can listen to many of his speeches, and every time this was a clear reference for him to give hope again and to realize the values of the European project. And in his words, we need to instill hope when we don't turn a blind eye to those in need, when we don't raise walls at our borders, when we fight every form of injustice. So let's continue his and our fight. Thank you.